Texas just banned the sale of smokable hemp flower and smokable hemp extract. So does that mean consumers can just buy it online from out of state, somewhere else where it's already legal? The state of Texas says, no, you can't. But some cannabis attorneys say, well, you probably can, but it's a legal gray area. And we're going to talk to one of those attorneys in a second. I'm Nathan Bernier. I'm with KUT News in Austin. We're at 90.5 FM, and you can check out our news online at KUT.org. Now, if you're not already familiar with this topic and you're thinking, wait a second, I thought cannabis was illegal in Texas. Well, it's a little more complicated. I just want to break it down really fast for those who are new to this. Cannabis is a plant. Hemp is a legal definition, and so is marijuana. And the line between hemp and marijuana is the percentage of delta-9 THC by dry weight. Delta-9 THC is the main ingredient in cannabis that gets people high. And it usually occurs in pretty low amounts. In fact, if you're in a state where cannabis is legal, say you're in Denver and you purchase some from a store, most of what you get from that flower is going to start out as something called THCA. And THCA, when it's heated or smoked, is converted into delta-9. But the legal definition in Texas of hemp doesn't mention THCA. It just talks about delta-9 THC. And that's why for the past several years, we've seen a proliferation of stores across the state selling what is often referred to as THCA flower or hemp flower. It is not delta-9 until it is smoked, at which point it does get people high. And that's why we're in this situation right now. And this all really started back in 2018 when the federal government legalized hemp nationwide with the 2018 Farm Bill. And this law, by the way, the 2018 Farm Bill, also prohibits states from interfering with the transportation of hemp, which further complicates this question of whether consumers in Texas will now be able to order smokable cannabis from out of state. Now, I will qualify this saying edibles are still legal in Texas, even those containing pure delta-9, because it's measured by weight. And you can have a gummy and you only need 10 milligrams of delta-9 THC to have a significant psychoactive effect. So it's very simple to have a gummy that does not exceed that threshold of 0.3% delta-9 THC. Before we get into our interview, one thing interesting I did learn in the course of reporting this is that Austin police, their enforcement has not changed. If they find someone who is carrying cannabis on them and they suspect that it might be marijuana and not hemp, they'll simply ask to see the packaging. And if you can show the packaging that says this is hemp, it has 0.3% delta-9 THC or less, then they'll let you keep it. And if you can't show that packaging, they're going to confiscate it, even if it is hemp, because they can't tell the difference. So stay tuned for that interview with a lieutenant in the Austin Police Department. But now I want to introduce you to Andrea Steel with the Banks Law Firm in Houston. And I started just by asking her, will people be able to order smokable cannabis products online from out of state now that this rule has taken effect as of March 31st?
I would venture to say that anybody who is wanting to place an order for a product that will no longer comply with the new rules will probably not have any qualms finding a company to ship it to them from out of state.
Okay, and is it legal? Will they get in trouble with the law? How do these rules, if at all, change the risk calculation someone has to make when they're trying to decide if they want to do that?
I would think that you have to think about like the feasibility and practicality of enforcement. And the low hanging fruit is going to be the enforcement of the people that they can touch right away. And so it's going to be more difficult to locate and get jurisdiction over an out of state company who's shipping products into the state of Texas using a federal agency, the United States Postal Service, and shipping through interstate commerce, which is expressly protected in the 2018 Farm Bill. That states aren't allowed to interfere with. Now, I mean, there's some arguments that exist out there, but I don't think any consumers will have a problem finding a product if they wanted to.
Can you explain that a little bit more for those unfamiliar with the 2018 Farm Bill? What did it carve out there in terms of that interstate commerce?
Sure, absolutely. So the 2018 Farm Bill created a statutory definition for hemp, which is basically the cannabis plant, all of its acids, cannabinoids, isomers, derivatives, so long as there is a Delta 9 THC concentration level that does not exceed 0.3% on a dry weight basis. So that's the statutory definition. What that did, in addition to that, what the Farm Bill did was create an opportunity for every state to be able to have authority over its own hemp production program. And when I say production, that's limited to cultivation, growing, producing the hemp crop. And so in 2019, every state, well, not right away, but after a few years, every state eventually did join into that program and either had its own hemp plan approved by the United States Department of Agriculture or allowed its hemp cultivators to grow underneath of the USDA federal program. So that's been going on. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so the 2018 Farm Bill. So what it did is created this definition for hemp, and then it descheduled it from the Schedule of Controlled Substances. So not only do we have a statutory definition of hemp, we have a whole the agricultural program about how a state can take control over its own hemp production program within its borders. And then we have the Schedule of Controlled Substances, which had hemp and THCs in hemp expressly carved out of the definitions of THC. So we had, multiple things going on at one time. What that has been taken to mean over the last 7 years is that at the federal level, the only cannabinoid that impacts the testing metric or the compliance metric is Delta 9 THC. On the agricultural side, it's a different metric because in that section about the hemp production plans, there is language about testing being done using post-decarboxylation methodology.
In other words, after it's been heated up, right? And that's what converts a THCA to Delta 9.
Correct. So on the agricultural side, on the plant side, that is the way that the United States Department of Agriculture has interpreted that to mean with respect to production. No, they preserve the rights of the FDA to oversee and regulate on the consumable side, food, drugs, cosmetics, etc. The FDA has failed to act, taken no significant action to make any difference on the consumable side. So at the federal level, what we have is an agricultural program that measures the total THC. We have a statutory definition that measures only the Delta 9 THC. We have a consumable agency that doesn't oversee it at the federal level. And then we have just a law enforcement agency that has had different statements with regard to that. That's at the federal level. Down here on the state level, we similarly in 2019 adopted an agricultural program, but unlike the FDA at the federal level, our health department actually did adopt a consumable hemp program, and they laid out a whole set of regulations. They bifurcated the programs. So we have agricultural overseeing production, we have health overseeing consumable. Completely different set of rules, completely different set of statutes, right? The definition of hemp remains consistent through the federal laws, the federal rules, the state laws, and the state rules. However, what DSHS is doing now, DSHS, the Department of State Health Services, that's the agency that oversees the consumable program. What these new rules are doing, in addition to some other problematic areas, is converting the Delta 9 compliance metric that has been the metric for compliance in the state of Texas for consumable products since its inception in 2019. They are shifting that to a total THC compliance threshold. They're not changing the definition of hemp, but they're changing how every other process of that program operates in relation to the definition of hemp. So completely shifting the program, taking out probably about half or more of the market. Again, this is a statutory rule. This is an agency rule that there's not been any statutory change. And if you think about where we've been over the history of hemp in Texas, right? We created our hemp program in 2019. In 2021, some bans were attempted that failed. A lawsuit was brought, and we sued the state. We were successfully able to secure a temporary injunction, which has been in place for the last 4 years. That had to do with, again, the Department of State Health Services going beyond its authority and messing around with definitions that impact really how the hemp program operates. So that's ongoing. That case is sitting at the Supreme Court. In the interim, we've had a 2023 session. No legislation was able to be passed. We had a 2025 session, and which at the last minute, under some, not so
some politics happened.
Behaviors, right? Yeah, under some interesting behaviors. At the very end of the session, a ban bill was passed. Now and let's back it up, because even during session, when I tell you this, people of Texas showed out to these hearings. We had a 12-hour hearing at the Senate State Affairs Committee. We had a 18+ hour hearing before the House Committee, and after that 18-hour meeting at the House Committee, which they brought a ban bill to the floor, they changed it to a regulation bill after they sat through and listened to all of that. So somehow, at the last day, they switched it back to a ban bill, forced it through, and then the governor vetoed the bill. They had not one but two special sessions, neither of which produced a regulatory bill, and the governor went ahead and issued an executive order calling for the state agency to review the rules and do what it can to issue more regulations, essentially around certain areas, mainly age gating, proper testing, packaging and labeling, and record keeping, really to just enhance the consumer safety piece of it. So we've had this large history of being very clear that the statute has not changed, right? Because there's been multiple attempts and all of them have failed, right? And I would say that that's not necessarily a failure. I would suggest that that is a policy statement of the citizens of Texas who communicated to their legislators, who then made it clear that there was not enough support there to get a ban bill through. So as you pointed out, the United States Postal Service is a federal agency. They're not subject to DSHS regulations. Once this, presume someone orders an ounce of THCA flower from another state, and then it arrives. Once it's in Texas, at that point, is it subject to regulations? Do the people in the other state have to pay the retail registrant fee to Department of State Health Services if they're selling into Texas? I don't know how any of this works, and I think a lot of consumers are certainly confused and curious. Rightfully so. It is very confusing, and any changes that are happening that are so drastic that happen without a change in the law is even more confusing. So consumable hemp products within the borders of the state of Texas need to meet the requirements of the state of Texas. Behavior that happens outside of the state of Texas is outside of the state of Texas. So if a retailer I would say if you have a website and you're selling into people in Texas, you're selling in Texas. But if you're manufacturing outside of Texas and your product somehow makes it into Texas through some other supply chain or through other piece of the supply chain, you're not required to have a manufacturing license because your products end up in Texas. All right. But on the retail side, you are selling direct to consumer. So if you're on a website, I would say that, yeah, you do have to pay that. The DSHS does say that a website counts as a location.
So then would they be prohibited under the Department of State Health Services regulations to sell the THCA flower or hemp flower to people in Texas? I think a lot of folks, and obviously we saw this happen when the state passed regulations, Department of State Health Services, I believe it was too, to prohibit vapes, cannabis vapes, and people buying them, or people are buying them from out of state. Is it just going to be the same thing? And yeah. Are people just kind of skirting the regulations, or do they really just not apply? Or is it a gray area?
Clear answer on that. Yeah, I don't know if we have a clear answer on that. So, are you skirting regulations that are being adopted that overreach their authority? I'm not sure. Is that a violation, right? And so, but then you have another issue here that is also very, very, very interesting, because in the state of Texas, for the last 7 years, consumable hemp only measured the Delta-9 metric, right? So the Department of State Health Services is issuing licenses for people who are selling, THCA flower. If the Department of Public Safety is using THCA while it is prosecuting people arresting people and investigating them, building charges against them, you have one substance on one hand being licensed by a state agency, and on the other hand being criminalized by a state agency, because they're looking at it two different ways. But if you look at this, the actual language of the statute, it's Delta 9 THC. There is no total, especially on the consumable side. There's never been a discussion of total THC. There's never been a discussion of post-decarboxylation. There's never been a discussion of, THCA. That never comes up and has not come up on the consumable side since the inception of the program. So for it to come up now as a rule is going to be very, very interesting. It's very confusing.
Is there anything else in these new rules adopted by DSHS that consumers should know when it comes to ordering out of state? For example, I mean, we've talked about the fees. That's going to affect quite likely the number of businesses from which people are able to purchase even edibles, which will, of course, remain available in Texas after these take effect March 31st. What do you think about these other aspects of the rules?
Interestingly, these rules, a lot of the headlines in the news have said that smokable flower is going to be banned as of the 31st. THCA flower will become non-compliant as of the 31st if these rules go into effect as adopted. However, Delta 8 and the other minor cannabinoids outside of THCA and outside of, below 0.3% Delta 9 THC are not impacted by these rules. And so people prefer flower. That is a large market share. And if they're not going to be able to access THCA flower, there's going to be a supply and demand for other flower. And it's going to end up being either CBD flower or CBG flower sprayed with Delta 8 or HAC or THC or some other kind of minor cannabinoid, as opposed to just having the natural hemp flower. So for this to be a consumer safety effort and remove the more natural product from access and create incentivization for a semi-synthetic or converted product to proliferate, it defeats the entire purpose.
That's a very interesting point, because THCP, which you mentioned, is a far more powerful cannabinoid than Delta 9 and lasts a lot longer as well. So I wonder if, you can imagine a scenario in which someone, not knowing that, purchases some legal smokable cannabis, and it's maybe sprayed with something like THCP, and they have a very bad experience or worse.
Well, one of the things that these rules do, which is a positive, is not only do they institute more robust record keeping procedures, they also put in recall procedures and like adverse event. So if there is these type of things, they can start keeping better records and then be able to recall products and get them off the shelves if they are problematic. So there are some definite positives. There's more clarity around packaging and labeling. There's age gating now. And, there are definitely positives in these rules that I think all parties are going to be, most parties will be satisfied with. But the record keeping, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to jump to the issue of registration fees for retail locations jumping 33-fold, manufacturers jumping 40-fold. What effect is that going to have on the market here in Texas? I mean, besides some very predictable ones of they're going to have to pay more and some places might go out of business, do you see any other knock-on effects from that?
Litigation. They're going to get sued. I mean, these are supposed to be fees that are necessary to be able to operate, enforce, and administer the program. And I don't know I don't think they have done any sort of, economical study to actually show how much does it cost to enforce the program. And what they threw in the proposed rules was, $20,000 or $25,000, ridiculous fees, right? $20,000 and $25,000. They reduced them to $5,000 and $10,000, but it's still ridiculous, and it still operates it operates punitively, not as a fee. So that's not how those are supposed to work. So they're inviting litigation in that aspect as well, and they're shutting down the business, and they're making it's not good for Texas businesses. because you're not going to stop the product from coming here. You're going to stop the Texas businesses from being able to reap the benefits of it, and the state of Texas from being able to capture the tax money from it. But the products are not going to go away.
I want to thank Andrea for taking the time to talk to me. If you want to read more about this story, you want more background on it, head on over to KUT.org. You can even just search KUT Hemp, and you'll get a bunch of our stories. Thanks for watching.